Afternoon. I've done one of these sessions before previously, but here I could bring in the printers and things, which I couldn't do at the other venue. I might just quickly get an idea. How many of you have printers or have done 3D printing or so? Yeah. Okay, so we got a few. All right. So. What's that, sir? Filament. Okay, yeah. Well, this is kind of easier than filament, to be honest. All right, so I'll just quickly run through. So basically, if you're looking to do printing scale models, you probably want to be doing resin 3D printing. Just the level of detail and smoothness is far surpasses filament. Filament's great if you're doing large items. So all these printing technologies have their own little advantages and niches. Stuff printed on filament printer, so a filament printer, for those who don't know, creates a model by extruding plastic. Molten plastic goes back and forwards and extrudes and builds up the model. Whereas the resin printer, so this is a resin printer, they have a pool of resin and a screen at the bottom, which is basically like an LCD on your phone, except it's a UV light. So, and it exposes layer by layer a very precise image, which then hardens the resin for each layer. So the layers on a printer like this go from 0.1 millimeters down to 0.01 millimeters. So 10 microns to 100 microns. I print at 30 microns, so I'll come to that in a minute, but the default is 50 microns. Most people print at 50 for general purpose stuff. I find scale models you can go a little bit lower and you still get improvement in quality, but I don't go all the way down because then you start having problems and there's no perceivable quality difference. I might, before I start, I'll just go probably the first question that people ask is like, is 3D printing, and this was actually more probably a couple of years ago that people were asking this, which is 3D printing at a point where the quality is good enough for scale modeling? And the answer to that is yes. If you go back 5 years, the answer was probably no. So every year they bring out new machines, new resins, new, well, the software doesn't change much, but and the quality gets better and better and better, to the point where it's now ridiculous. Like even a machine from several years ago can print parts you can't even see with your eye, so you can actually literally print detail that is not visible to your eye. So, well, not mine, but like that sort of little holes that are 0.1 millimeters. And it's really, really small stuff. So I've got a few example pieces here to pass around for people to have a look to see the sort of quality that you can get from a resin printer. Some of them these are all test pieces, so you don't have to worry about breaking them. So I'm not sure how. Yeah, so you have a turret. Again, just pass them along or something. So some of them I have. Sometimes when I print, I will prime it just to check. Sometimes easy to see. That one's a bit dusty, but it's a bit old. Got some. Here you can have a lab wheel. So yeah, we can print really fine stuff like these. I'll show the camera. Like these 48 scale Vickers Mark 6 tracks. Yeah, there's some road wheels. And so you can do some very thin things that you couldn't really do I don't know. Can the camera pick this up, Pete? Yeah. So there's some things you can kind of do well, which is very thin walls. So you couldn't really achieve that with injection molding or solely with photo etch. So it's kind of got a little bit of the advantages of both, but also has a few disadvantages. What I'll do is I'll just pass the box around now, and you can chuck them in the box when you finish. The other thing I've been playing with recently is parts that I guess are functional. So there's a set of Centurion trucks in 35th scale that you can pass those around. So it's individual links and little pins. Okay, so but the pins lock in, so these are actually pretty easy to assemble, and they don't require much cleanup. Can you see that thing? Yeah. So you can basically snap them off. Quick rub with a sanding stick on the ones. Yeah. Quick rub on the sanding stick. Hold them together. Stick a pin in with a pair of tweezers. Oh, actually, it's easy with your fingers, and just push them in. And so they push in very easily until the last millimetre, and then you give it a little bit more of a push and it locks in. So that's the same as those the full link set over there. You'll notice, I'm sure all of you have noticed who buy aftermarket, that the aftermarket industry is all going into 3D printing now, rather than resin casting. There's a few advantages to that. One is the masters never die. Two is you can, if you make a mistake or new information comes to light, better references, you can change it. So, and that often happens. So, you can keep improving the design, and next time you print, you've got all the improvements. So you're not stuck with a whole bunch of, a new kit comes out that replaces the old one. You make some slight modifications to have it fit the new boxing, a few extra parts, so that sort of thing. So it comes in handy like that. All right, so we'll just go over. I'll focus on the machines first. So this is the 3D printer. This is a pretty standard one from about a year and a half ago. This is a medium size, which is probably the biggest size you probably use for scale models stuff. The home printers tend to come in three sizes. One is the smaller one. So the smaller ones actually have the highest resolution because, typically, because if you can imagine, this one has an 8K screen. So a lot of the smaller ones also have an 8K screen. So you can imagine if you've got a smaller area with the same number of pixels, it's higher density. There's a new one of this that has 12K. There's new, little ones that have more. To be honest, I could print almost the same quality on a 2K machine, which it was smaller than this, admittedly. Plate was like this. So if you're just, I went and got a bigger machine because I'm starting to print parts for other people, and I needed to print more of them in bulk. So, I mean, if you're printing stuff like, turrets like this and miniatures and figures and accessories, you'd be fine with the small printers, and they're getting quite cheap, and the quality is excellent. They're probably around $300 mark, a lot of them, which it's not cheap, but it's I think it's cheap for what you get now, considering where they were a few years ago. So that's a printer itself, and I'll explain how it works in a minute. This is these two always come together. So if you buy a smaller printer, typically these are one more smaller, but also they're one base unit, and this is basically a magnetic stirrer. So this is the washing machine. So prints come off. I'm not going to print with actual resin because the ventilation in here is not. Oh look, it's no. Yeah, it probably is, but one advantage over you don't create much dust. So if you've ever bought a poured resin aftermarket set and you've got to saw away and sand and all of it, you don't have to do much at all. I think any dust's bad to breathe, to be honest, like regardless of what it is. It also depends on the resin. I mean, there are one of the big users of 3D printers is dentists, and they print stuff that you put in your mouth. So uncured resin is always toxic. Cured resin, it's much like plastic. And like I said, you can actually get food grade ones and ones for implants and things. Obviously, I don't buy those because one, they're expensive and they won't have the properties that I want for this. But generally, once they're cured, they're much like plastic. The dust is not good to breathe. You're right, but you're not generally going to be drilling it or cutting huge feet off or sanding a lot. Most stuff, you take the supports off and it's like teeny tiny little sprue gate marks, so much smaller, but usually like a couple of passes with a sanding stick will solve it, and you can wet sand it, and then you don't have a dust problem. I'll stick that on. So yeah, this is the washing machine, and this is the UV curing machine. So this one, like I said, just basically creates a whirlpool of whatever you put in it. So if you're using water washable resin, it might be water. If you're using normal resin, it'll be either ethanol, like metho, or IPA, which is you'll see online most people tend to use IPA, and a big part of that is because it's more commonly available in Europe and the US, and they use it a lot. So to them, that's like metho. I use metho because it's much more. They both clean fine. Some resins will actually specify, and they'll say, "Oh, ethanol works better with this resin to clean," or IPA. But I've never had a problem using either of them.
What is IPA?
Oh, isopropyl alcohol. Yeah. Sorry. So I do have a spray bottle of it, which I use to clean the plate, just because it's convenient in a spray bottle. But most of the time, I use methylated spirits to clean. To be honest, the cleaner is the fumiest bit of the process. Obviously, a big tub of metho doesn't smell that great. So I do have extraction in my area, which is more for the airbrush. Well, it was for the airbrush originally. But it also helps to remove that. This one you can see actually this is a charcoal filter. So that comes with it. But it pretty much eliminates all the smell. I don't know if it eliminates all the toxic gases, but these resins now don't smell. A few years ago, they smelled horrible. You wouldn't want, these ones really don't smell much at all. So the machine's not, it's not, it doesn't stink out the aroma. It's not like, leveling thinner or something like that, but you don't want to be in the room with it. So that said, I wear the respirator. So I wear that if I'm spray painting with lacquers. Well, actually, if I'm spray painting with anything, that's usually lacquers. But I also use it for this. So usually when I'm cleaning, you know, I've got all the metho out and stuff. I'm used to wearing it now. So when you first get one of these, you hate it. But after a while, you get used to it, and sometimes you forget to take it off and walk out to the kitchen and go, oh crap, got the. So I'm so used to it. The other one, so I'm just going to go through the PPE while we're here. So these are good. If you've got a really well ventilated area, or you've got an airbrush hood or something that you stick stuff in, you probably won't need it. Like if you've got extraction. If I've got the extraction on, I can get away with not using it. It's more, like I said, to get rid of the smell of the metho. The other one, this is the most important one. So nitrile gloves, not latex, or vinyl or any of the other ones. So these are chemical proof, and they're particularly resin proof. They're not super expensive, but they're not as cheap as you get them at Bunnings, a 100 pack, and $15 or something, $20. They last a while, but you do go through these. So the two things you go through is this and this paper towels. I use a lot of paper towels. Yeah, so in terms of consumables, you've got the resin itself. Now, the resin's not cheap, but you get a lot out of it. So this is a litre, and I bought these in bulk from China, so it cost about $37 for a litre. But like those tracks you're passing around, I could print hundreds of sets of those with this. So if you're comparing it to buying parts that are already printed, it's a lot cheaper. So I don't find the resin's the major cost, because people always say, oh, how much will it cost? How much resin you got to use? It's like, I don't care. The resin's not an issue. What I go through is metho, gloves, and paper towels. There's lots of them. So there's no avoiding that. The other thing that you really need is a bin to put all your paper towels in, because you tend to go through a lot of them. So this is the build plate. So this is just like a flat aluminium piece. And what do we got here? So when it was new, it was probably around $600. But like I said, it's a bigger one because I'm printing stuff and selling some of it. So, right, so this is the vat. So this is what you fill this up with resin. And on the bottom, we've got what's called the FEP. So it's a tight piece of special plastic. I don't know. And I don't know if you guys can see, here's the LCD screen. So basically, each layer of the print is just displayed on this screen for basically how long the resin takes to cure. It waits, and it moves up, comes back down. I'll show you this in a minute. 30 microns above where it was before. Does the next layer, is back down 30 microns or 50 or whatever you've set it to. So these are consumable as well. These sheets, they last a long time if you don't puncture them. This one I brought in is kind of near the end of its life. So it's a bit scratched up and got a few little dings in it and a bit cloudy. But it would still work fine. It would still print fine. But I'll probably replace that now because it's been in there for months. They're not expensive. They're like maybe $5 each, but they last months and months unless you do something silly. What's annoying about them is you have to take a lot of Allen key bolts out to replace them. So it takes about half an hour to change one of these. And you've got to sort of tension the corners and sort of go around and get it so it's pretty much like a drum skin. I used to play drums, so it's very much like putting a new drum skin on. Yes, occasionally you've got to change those, but not very often. I'll just pop that back in there. It's a lot better. Okay, that's a really good question, actually. So it's very, very different to because we're doing slice by slice. So with an FDM machine, like PLA or an extruder, basically the more complex your model is, the longer it's going to take, and the bigger it is, and all of that. So with this, complexity doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is height. Okay, because it's doing everything layer by layer. It doesn't care if you're doing, a cube or a detailed turret. A turret would take slightly longer because it's slightly taller, but if they were the same height, they'd take exactly the same time to print. So, and it wouldn't matter if there's 50 of them on the plate as well. So the only consideration in terms of how long it takes to print is how tall your print is. So this will print stuff up to about that high. Never got anywhere near that. Some people print gigantic figures and things like that, which that would take a long time, probably 24 hours to do that.
So is that why you print it off at an angle rather than vertical?
No. I'll get to that in a minute. So basically it's just the height. So, and depending on your settings, so how many microns your layer size is. So most people use 50 microns, and if you're starting out, that's the best one to use is 50 microns because it's mostly because all the settings for the resins and it's the default. So all the resins like usually say on the bottle what the settings for it are in 50 microns. Whereas you'll have to 30 microns. I use 30, but only because I'm doing small, tiny stuff. So it's just easier at 50. You probably can't tell the quality difference much anyway. It's only with the little pins that go in and things like that where I can tell.
So just as a rule of thumb,
yeah.
If you're printing it for 50 micron,
yep.
How long would it take to print a model a centimetre high, for example?
A centimetre, maybe 45 minutes. Most prints like this one, okay, this one 30 microns, that would probably take 4 hours, 3 hours, but it also depends on the resin a bit. So you can also set lots of parameters, so things like wait times, and so I actually use a lot of wait time because I can print these faster, and I can print them faster using different resin too. I'll get to the resins in a minute, but so it does depend on the resin. So I could get a high-speed resin, and I could print it, some of them up to 10 centimeters an hour, but you do lose quality. And with scale model stuff, you're aiming for quality. So, whereas if you're printing a figure this big, get the rapid resin and do it, it'll be a lot quicker. So there's a balancing act. Newer printers are getting faster; they get faster as well. But it has more to do with the resin that you're using. All right, so I'll quickly show you how these work. Yep, so once you finish printing, I'll show you the preparation for printing in a minute, but the actual printing, you just put the memory card in and press print. So there's not much to that. Then you wait for it to finish. Once it's finished, if your print's not too tall, what I do is when it finishes, I leave it for 15 minutes. Usually I'm working, and so it's probably 2 hours, but it doesn't matter. You just leave it for a little bit. A lot of the resin will drip off. So when it's finished, it'll come up out of the resin about this high. If it's a bigger print, it'll be higher, obviously, but and the spare resin will start dripping off. So you leave it for a while because that saves you cleaning and wasting it. After about 15-20 minutes, it's usually dripped most of the resin off that it's going to in that direction. I'll come and turn it sideways. And as long as the print's not too long, which most of mine aren't, so usually like this, it'll drip more resin off in that direction because we drain out of cavities and stuff like that. That's quite handy because it actually does remove a lot of the excess resin, makes the cleaning easier. So I didn't bring in 7 litres of metho to fill this up, but I'll show you. So once I've done that, I will put gloves on, by the way. That can go into there. All right, so all my parts are there. Put that. This resin I usually use 3 minutes. And so there's a little propeller at the bottom. It's just like a magnetic stirrer, basically. And that'll create like a whirlpool of metho.
That's full right up to the plate.
Yeah. So I use a 2-washing method. So this will, and every so often this will stop, turn around and go the other way. So, and it does a really effective job at cleaning. But obviously you don't want to change that much cleaning fluid very often. So this is what's called a dirty wash. So this will be, I'll use this for quite a long time. So it'll get, even dirty, it'll get 95% of all the resin off. When it's finished, it'll beep. I won't bother waiting for it. And then what I'll do, sorry, obviously I have more space. I'll just move this back with it. So usually what I do is once that's finished, I'll hold it there for a minute, usually against the side. All the metho or IPA water or whatever you're using will drip off. I should probably show you with the gloves on. So usually when I'm cleaning, I use the 1 glove technique. So these gloves are pretty good for dexterity, actually. So they don't really hamper your ability to do stuff. But I do, when I'm cleaning, use the 1 glove, which means this hand has the glove on it, and it's the only hand that's allowed to touch the resin stuff. So this hand, I've usually got the airbrush, or the little brush. So I'll pull it out, drain it off, pop it onto the paper towel. You will, at that point, have a print stuck on there like that. So you grab your paint scraper. The printers always come with paint scraper, by the way, and the little brush and stuff. And you'll just knock it off. Like, it sometimes takes a little bit of effort. It depends how big it is, and how flat it is. So take the part off like that, and then I'll usually grab another piece of paper towel. Squirt. This kind of thing. So I'll give this a good clean. And once that's clean, I'll stick it aside to dry. They clean very easily because it's just metal and there's hardly any resin on it and you're rocking it with IPA. But you want it to be nice and clean. But the IPA and the method get things like that cleaned very, very easily. That'll go in the bin probably. So then we've got this one. So then I have a little bucket like this. So this will have really, really clean metho in it. And so I will grab this and I will just do this, agitate it a little bit, just a few seconds. I'll pop it on the paper towel sideways and half it will wick off straight away. And then I grab the airbrush and I just blast it with the airbrush. The airbrush will, there's usually no resin left on it by this point, but if there is, the airbrush will blow it off with the metho onto the paper towel. And the airbrush is really dries it very quickly. So I'll always do the clean wash of these and I'll fully dry it with the airbrush. But it only takes a few seconds to dry it with the airbrush. If you're doing really delicate parts, I put the pressure down a bit so I don't blow bits off. But generally 20 seconds, that will be dry. Then you look at it, and if there's any resin left on it, you'll be able to see it because it will have, it's like glossy tide marks. So it's like you've got a bit of, I use matte resins, and one of the reasons for that is it's much easier to see the glossy tide marks on it. So, and to see if it's perfectly clean. So you'll see if it's still got resin on it. If it does, it'll probably only be a really small amount by that point. You just swish it again, give another blast with the airbrush. Obviously, some shapes are worse than others for cleaning. So something like this turret, which is pretty much a little bucket if you put it up that way. So I would definitely, when I put that in the metho, I would do this a couple of times just to make sure metho gets inside and pours back out again. But all in all, it's relatively quick and easy. The washing of the parts is probably the most labour intensive bit. Most of the other stuff's pretty automated. You don't need to you can get away with not having these two, all right? However, I do recommend having the curing machine because it's just much more predictable than, because you can just put them in the sun and they'll cure. But if you stick it in the sun, it can be a bit random as to how much UV exposure it's going to get. So, and once again, depends on the resin how well it reacts to that. But these are usually pretty cheap. And with the smaller machines, these are, like I said before, I think they're a 2-in-1. So you'd only have the one base plate, which is probably about this big, and you swap between putting the bucket on top or the turntable. So it'll take up less space too, of course. I used to have one of those when I had the smaller printer. So it's only when the bigger, they tend to be two separate machines. Yeah, so once you've finished doing that, and that's dried off with the airbrush, I'll leave it to dry thoroughly, I guess you'd say. Probably at least 15 minutes, often all day, doesn't matter by that point. So once it's clean, it's safe to handle it. So it is cured at that point, but it's not hard, if that makes sense. I've got one here that so this has been printed and washed, but I don't know if you guys want to. You'll see it's a bit squishy. It's a bit flexible still.
So that one hasn't been cured.
That hasn't been cured yet. So it hasn't been post-cured, like is what you say. So this has cured it, but it hasn't been post-cured to go hard. So what this will do is give it extra UV and make it go crispy.
So is that going to box the UV light?
Yeah, I'll show you in a sec. So.
You know how like you get that glue, you have the UV light with it.
Yeah, exactly the same thing.
You put the glue on it and stick it in there, or?
Yeah, you probably could if it's the right wavelength of UV light. Yeah. I'll just wait a second. I'll grab those back and I'll cure them and pass them around again. You'll see the difference. Well, we'll wait for that. Does anyone have any questions about those bits?
So what's the advantage of having the separate tax, just convenience, rather than the one that does both the curing and the washing?
No real benefit other than, I guess lugging this on and off all the time would be a bit annoying, but it takes up more space. So I'm not sure there's any real benefit to having the separate ones other than you don't have to move them. Yeah. So with a small machine, which I used to have what I'd call a small size machine, this is a medium sized machine, that wasn't an issue because the bucket's much smaller. And it doesn't, I mean, 7 litres of methane weighs almost 7 kilos. So to be, and it's kind of magnetically stuck down a little bit. But yeah, to move that, pick that up and put it down all the time, I don't know, hazard. Yeah, so that's the other thing. Yeah, this is a fire hazard. If you're using methyl or IPA to wash, it is a fire hazard. So you should bear that in mind as well, safety-wise. Oh, cool. I'll grab those. We got one more somewhere. Ah, yeah, that's it. Oh, so this bit's really easy. This bit's no trouble at all. So once they've dried, you're sure they're 100% dry. This resin only takes 1 minute. So basically just rotate around and give it even coverage and the UV light. So these will be either yellow or green or red, and basically these block UV light so you don't hurt your eyes. So
100% dry, otherwise you're worried about.
oh yeah, that's a good point. If it's not 100% dry, yeah. Well, it could be water as well, if you're using water washable resin. But if it's not 100% dry, you can get fracturing, I guess. Yeah, you can get some problems with fracturing and parts cracking and things like that later. Not usually doesn't do it straight away, but it's more an issue with the water washable ones, to be honest. Metho tends to evaporate pretty quick anyway. So even if you were had left them only for 2 minutes while you wash the others, they're probably dry anyhow. So, but I do tend to leave them a little bit longer just so that any, like in, the cavities inside there and, inside the turret and stuff would have fully evaporated off. Of course, that's a bit weather dependent too. Some it takes no time at all. Okay, I probably didn't pick the best resin for this example, but okay. You'll see now that's, I might give it another 30 seconds actually. It's a bit more obvious. Random. Random, like middle of summer, the sun's intense. Like, you're probably overexposing it if you're sticking in the sun in the middle of summer, in about a couple of minutes. Yeah, other times of year, less so. If it was in indirect sunlight, then it's which is probably a better way to do it. You could probably leave it out there for a couple of hours, like if it was not in direct sun. That'd be enough scattered UV to cure it. Some people also put them into glass jars with water so that the water scatters the light. I've not tried that. Apparently it works okay. Obviously that's for non-water soluble resins. Right. So if you check that out, it's kind of gone crispy now. Yeah. This resin does have a little bit of flex in it, anyway, but that's much harder than it was a minute and a half ago.
Sorry, just to run all those machines.
Yeah.
Very expensive with electricity.
No.
Just like
No. So this one you'll run for quite a few hours, right? They're all pretty low voltage devices.
Oh, okay, excellent.
Yeah, so they're all got power packs. So they're all running off 12 volts or 5 volts. So this one you will run a fair bit because the prints obviously take several hours. this I run for 3 minutes per print, and this one I run usually like a minute and a half or minute.
One other question, just if you were going pretty detailed with the current 1 to 350 or something like that on the ship, what would you estimate the cost of one unit using all the production costs there?
Oh, how big?
Just the 1 to 350,
Like
like one of those turrets you had.
like similar to size to that.
Would you say $10?
I'd say the resin cost in that, which the program actually predicts for you if you put the pricing in, is probably around 50 cents.
50 cents.
Yeah, maybe
Just
even
that's
less.
resin.
That's the resin, yeah.
Everything else, it's not even safe. Probably $5
I'd probably say it's probably about $5 for a whole plate of them. So the resin, like I said, the resin would be a big issue if you're printing large stuff, functional stuff. This is why people say the resin's expensive. Like, if you're printing solid big things, yes, it's expensive because you use a lot of resin, and it's like $30 a bottle. So if you print a 10 centimeter solid cube, that's going to cost you $30. But some other stuff you're printing generally very small things and very thin walls, and so something like that's probably 10 mils of resin. The slicer will actually estimate for you the cost. So most of the like full plates and stuff I print probably come out to around somewhere between $1.50 and $3 a plate. So the resin's not the cost. The big cost in it is time and the cleaning. So and these things, because probably using 2 of those probably costs as much as the resin, or a couple of those, to clean it.
So it's very significantly cheaper than buying it from somebody else.
It is once you make the initial investment, yeah. So probably for a small size setup of what I've got here would probably be $400 or $500. Yeah.
What about this comparable new ones that size?
This size, they tend to always be about around the same price point. So the small ones printers are usually around the $300 to $400 mark. Yep. These medium-sized ones are in the $600 to $700. These are usually for the small ones under $100, and for for the 2, they always come in. Even this comes as a pair in the one box, and the medium size about 150. So this was probably around, I think it was about 120 or 130. So these aren't overly expensive. And you don't really need to upgrade these either. So if you were to get another printer later, you can generally use the same one as long as it's big enough.
So you buy it all in Australia, don't have to go overseas?
Yeah. Don't have to go overseas. Yeah, I mean, if you need to fork out for stuff like that as well, I mean, stuff like the airbrush is really handy. Like, I would hate to actually wash them without compressed air. Like, so that would be annoying if you didn't. But most of you guys probably have air brushes, so that's not an issue. And normal airbrush is fine. It's just 20 psi, 30 psi. Right, so when you first get the machine, you need to calibrate it. So so basically that's on a ball joint. So there's a ball joint in there. So if you loosen these 2 Allen bolts, this plate will go wobbly. So all you do to calibrate it, you loosen those Allen bolts, and then you go in the tools. It's hard to read from that angle. Yeah. Go to home. it'll lower down.
So calibrate basically means make it flat with the surface.
Yeah. So this is already calibrated, so it'll be fine. But what you do is, I would usually do this not with the tank in. All right. All right. So I would take the tank out, put a sheet of paper under it, set it to home, and it'll go down, and then you just, what you want is the paper to evenly pull out. So not gripping on one side more than the other, but requiring a little bit of forced drag. The newer machines actually self-level, so probably not much of a problem. And you can adjust up and down, 0.1 millimeter, whatever. You can also use this just to move it up if you need to. And then once you've got that right, you press the Z = 0 button, and that sets that as 0. Once you've set that up, you pretty much never need to change it. So if you calibrate it well the first time, it generally doesn't need to be changed. So that's calibrating the machine. Calibrating the machine, you do once, it's easy. This is a test exposure finder. So when you get a new resin, you print one of these things off. So there's a whole bunch of these available from all the manufacturers, have their own, but it doesn't matter which one you use. So when I was setting this resin up, so this resin, okay, it doesn't have values on the bottle. Some of them do, but the website will always have the calibration settings, and so it will tell you what settings you need to put in for this machine, and then you print one of these off, and then you adjust it if you need to. So there's also instructions on how to interpret these on the websites. But if I pass it around, it's basically just prints a bunch of little meshes and pins and holes, and so you can see how well that resin's dealing with those settings. And so for instance, like it's got 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, up to 2 mil, little 2 millimeter tall pillars. So if it's not printing the smallest ones, then it's probably underexposing. If the holes, and it's also got little holes in different millimeter sizes, if those holes are filling in at the small sizes, then you're probably overexposing. So, but it will tell you on the instructions on how to interpret that. I think in terms of operation.
Do you leave the leftover resin in the machine, or do you have to drain it every time?
Okay, I leave it in there.
How long will that last?
With the top on? Oh, weeks, pretty much. Oh, pretty much, yeah. I print a fair bit, so never lasts that long. Yeah, I just top it up. So what is important though is, so a lot of people do completely empty it out, filter it, all that sort of stuff every time. That's overkill and way too much cleaning up and loss of resin. I leave it in there. There is on here and all printers have this. Most printers are pretty similar because all these major brands use the same motherboards. Basically, it's a Cheeto box. They're called Cheeto printers. Right. All right, go back. So under tools, there's the tank clean function. And if you press that, so basically you can 15 seconds, it'll just expose 100% exposure for 15 seconds. And then you can peel off that. So any detritus in the tank will settle to the bottom, and anything stuck to the build plate, to the plastic sheet, the FEP, will come off. So that worked really well, and it wastes less resin than draining and refilling. A lot less effort. You have to be a little bit careful pulling it out to not splash resin, but once again, less so than actually draining it. There's another calibration piece. They're two different resins. So basically just checking the dimensional accuracy of that resin. So I'll print that. It's exactly 20 millimeters in all the dimensions. And then I'll get the calipers out and check it's right. Because if you're trying to do little locking pins for workable tracks that are point something millimeters in size and you want them to fit, like you want the resin to print at the right size, otherwise not bigger than it should or smaller. That's why I use this resin. This doesn't shrink. So there's a lot of resins and they get better, like significantly better every year. This is actually not my favorite one. The darker red one is. This one's the lighter one. But this doesn't shrink, and I buy ones that don't shrink. A lot of the cheaper ones shrink considerably, like I think by volume about 5%, which dimensionally is about 1.7% if you take the cube root of it. Which makes a difference in some things. It doesn't in a lot of things. Like, I mean, a lot of people using these printers are using it for figures. It doesn't matter. They still have beautiful detail. It's only if you're trying to do very small things that need to fit together. So you can use the other resins. You just need to make sure you have leave enough tolerance. And we're probably talking like 50 microns or 60 microns of tolerance to fit things together, but it's a lot easier if the resin doesn't shrink on you. And it stops warping as well with very thin pieces. So if you have a thin piece of resin meeting a very thick piece, it can warp.
Yeah.
Hey, Ben?
Just wanted to ask, you like that later part show about the computer, do you want to split this presentation into 2 bits and take a short break?
Yeah, if you want to, yeah.
Yeah, you can do it that way.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So pause when you feel like it's logical pause and we'll take a short break and intermission and come back.
Yeah, I don't know where I was. Yeah. I mean, what do you guys want to do? Like, yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think I've covered what these will do in using the machine. Was there anything else you wanted to know about?
Just to overhang on these ones before supports are needed.
Oh, yeah, resin dependent.
Yeah.
But is that test print thing there? Yeah, that one. Okay, so that's one of the things it checks for. So this is actually my preferred resin. So you'll see they've got numbers on top. There's 2.54. So that's measured. See those little bridges?
Oh wow, yeah, so you can go.
Oh, no, not those ones. These ones. Right.
Yeah.
So those little bridges, and they've got numbers on them.
Okay.
So that's how many millimeters it's trying to span.
Yeah, wow.
So that resin's really good in terms of doing those. A lot of the others you'll see the spans are droopy. So they'll get droopy as they get longer.
Yeah.
And that's because it's not got enough support in the middle and the resin's not rigid enough.
Okay,
Yeah, and that's a more rigid resin than the pink stuff that was on the turret. So it wouldn't perform as well in that test. So flexibility means you can't bridge as far,
yeah, okay.
but it also means stuff's a little bit more durable on fine parts because they flex rather than snap instantly. So yeah, a lot of when you're reading about resins, people will be complaining, oh, it's not durable enough. It's because they're using it for purposes that aren't like what we're using it for. So scale models, you don't need to worry too much about how strong. Like you don't want it to be so fragile it just falls apart, but it's not like people playing a game with figures who go, oh, it snaps when I get angry and throw it. Like you know, once you put on a scale model, it's not, you know, you expect if you drop a scale model on the floor, it's destroyed, it's busted, you know. So people complaining, oh, the resin breaks if I drop it. It's like, it doesn't matter to what we're using it for. So that's one of the things where people will often say, oh, this resin's great detail, but it's too fragile. And you go, well, it's fine for what I'm using it for. So it's just everyone else is using it for something else where they're worried about durability. Yeah, I think that's probably a good spot to. How many of you wanted to look at the computer stuff?
So the main thing is where do you get the program and the script to actually do that turret? Do you do that yourself? Do you do the code or?
Oh, the turret?
Yeah.
Oh, I designed that in CAD.
So you actually design it yourself?
Yeah. There are models, places you can buy files from. Not always. There's a lot of free ones as well. But it's about knowing what's good. It's a bit of a. No, some of the free ones are better than the paid ones. Like it's also getting the right thing. You know, a lot of them are for wargaming and bolt action and things like that. So they're not at the detail level that we would consider acceptable. But at the reverse side, there's quite a few scale modelers who do stuff and put up for free. So, and it's good. So, yeah, we'll pause there.